Welcome to Northern BC Narratives on Location. Today, I have another amazing guest by the name of Hilary. She's an accomplished author, and she's doing a lot of amazing things around the world. Hilary, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Hello.
So, good. Talk about yourself a little bit and what you do.
I'm a physiotherapist and retired,
Yep.
but since retiring, actually before I retired, I started writing,
Yep.
and I have now published 3 travel memoirs.
Yep.
Before I started the travel memoirs, I used to write the outdoors column for the Prince George Citizen.
Oh, wow, that was you.
Newspaper. And because I love the outdoors and do a lot of hiking and cross-country skiing and love wildlife, and so all of those things came into the weekly column, which I really enjoyed doing. I don't do that anymore.
How come?
Citizens' decision, they moved on and didn't have the local writers so much.
Oh, wow. So are you an outdoors person or?
Yes, I am. I live at Summit Lake, which is a rural community north of Prince George. Yeah. And we built our own log house there. We felled the trees ourselves and pulled them out of the bush and peeled the logs and built the house. It's right on the shores of Summit Lake. And I can put my skis on outside the door and go cross-country skiing in the bush. And I love winter, actually, because in the summer I have to worry about bears and mosquitoes, and in the winter they're all sleeping, so I'm quite safe.
They leave you alone.
Yes.
So when did you build that house? Now I'm like, it's interesting.
Oh, I would say 25, maybe even 30 years ago now.
30 years ago. So why build a house yourself?
It was my husband's wish for all his adult life. He wanted to build his own house. He had actually already built a frame house, but he wanted to build a log house, and he went on a log building course. And then I was his main helper. And it's all dovetail corners, so they fit together just perfectly, no gaps between the logs, and it's easy to heat and retains its heat well, and we heat with wood, and I cook on wood, and so it's a rural lifestyle. We grow all our own food, have a very big garden. And
you said big gun?
Big garden, big vegetable garden.
I thought you said big gun. You know?
No, not a gun, a garden.
It's like big gun. What kind of a gun? You have one of those.
My husband does hunt, so we do eat wild game, but no, it's mostly the vegetable garden that feeds us.
How was the whole process? Because I know building your own house from nature is a lot of work. I think, how does it work? Let's talk about what happened that you had this idea, and then how were you thinking? Were you like, hey, I'm excited, oh God, I got to do this? So
I was excited. It was mostly my husband's project, but I was happy to help do it for sure. There was a lake called Crystal Lake where they had an area where you were allowed to cut a tree. I think it was $1 a tree.
$1 a tree?
I'm pretty sure that was right. They were lodgepole pine. And so we cut the amount that we needed. And then our longest wall is 20 feet because that's all the 2 of us could handle in the length of a log. And we did the log work in 1 year. It took 2 years to complete the house, but we got the log work finished in 1 year. We had help from other people too, but it was mostly my husband and myself.
So you built the house in 2 years, right? Was it a lot of work or?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. The way you're talking, like you make it easy.
It was a lot easier then. We've recently, 10 years ago, decided to build an extension on it. And the log work went fine, but we still haven't finished the extension. So with age, the work becomes a lot slower. But back then, we worked fast and were agile, and my husband could walk along the log with the chainsaw, no problem. And now it's a bit different now.
So you grow your own food?
Yeah, we grow.
Let's talk about that, because you know what, there's the food security is very important, and nobody knows how to grow food anymore. Everybody is depending on this stuff, right? And let's talk about why you grow your own food and how you grow your own food. Especially in Prince George, it's so cold in here, like minus 40 degrees. Like, what do you grow?
Oh, but the summer's not.
Oh, so you just grow in the summer? How does it work? Tell me the
Yeah,
whole
you
process.
can't grow in the winter. But no, I plant the garden in May, and it keeps expanding. Like there's only 2 of us living at home now, and we grow way more than we need. So we give what we can to the kids and anybody else who needs it. But well, not anybody else.
I was going to say, are we potatoes here? We are anytime.
Yeah, we got loads of potatoes, loads of carrots. Like all the root crops are really easy to grow here, and cabbage, broccoli, spinach, all the leaf vegetables, salad vegetables, parsnips, turnips, peas, beans, squash. We grow all of that, and we actually, like I harvest it all end of September, early October, but we do leave half of our potatoes and half of our carrots in the ground over the winter, but we protect them with bags of leaves so the ground doesn't freeze. Once the snow comes, that stops the ground from freezing. But if we have a cold spell before the snow comes, then the leaves help protect it. And then I do them in 3 or 4 different clumps, so you can just dig one without disturbing the other ones. So when we get low on carrots or potatoes, I can go out in the middle of winter and dig.
And they still grow?
Sorry?
They still grow in the winter?
No, they're not growing, but it's a good way to store them. Like we do also have a cold room, but they store better in the ground under the snow.
So when do you harvest?
We harvest mostly the end of September, early October, but the ones that we leave in the ground over winter, we can leave them there and just dig them up whenever we're short and get them.
September, October. We're just going to grab your address. We're going to come September, October with a truck.
As long as you help dig, you're welcome.
Like, who are these guys? Hey.
Like a lot of it gets put in the freezer, so there's a lot of work involved because you have to blanch everything before you freeze it, and some of it we can, and so it's a lot of work, but I love it. Don't really trust the other food, which might have come from other countries and have travelled and wasting gas on the way as it travels, and so it's much better to get fresh food out of your garden.
It's very important. You know, there's the whole thing doesn't make any sense why we have to import so much food from other countries when we can grow stuff ourselves. In Japan, actually, they built this building because, it's very hard for them to grow food, I guess, right? They built this giant building, and its stories high, but it just grows food. The whole thing but it's so cheap and so efficient, right? That they don't really import a lot of stuff. I think it's one of the cities in there, and it's just like they don't import anything. Everything goes to the grocery store at cheap prices, right? So, and I don't know why we don't do it here.
I still have to buy tea and coffee and sugar.
Oh, that stuff, of course,
and
coffee,
flour.
But
not much else.
Yeah, but your own food, when you grow your own food, you have full control over it, right? You know what you put inside of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know how old it is, right?
Yeah, we don't use any fertilizers or any insecticides.
Remember, I got to write this date down. How did you get into this, like growing your own food and whatnot?
Well, my husband was a farmer. He was raised on a farm. I was born in England, and we didn't have a vegetable garden. We grew some of our own fruit. We had apple trees, pear trees, raspberries, but we didn't have a vegetable garden. So it's really my husband's influence to grow this big vegetable garden. But I found that I really enjoyed gardening, so it's all good.
Wow. Did you have any kids?
Yeah, 4 kids.
You have 4 kids. You have 4 kids.
11 grandchildren.
11 grandchildren. Oh my God, I'm getting
19 great grandchildren.
Oh, come on.
2 great-greats.
No.
Yeah, we have a big family.
You're not joking. You're joking, right?
No, I'm not joking.
You have great-grandchildren and grandchildren?
I've got 2 great-grandchildren.
How is that possible? You don't look, like...
If I don't look it, I am it anyway.
It's organic food, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the food that does it.
Oh, man. Definitely coming.
And the outdoor lifestyle, that all helps.
Great-grandchildren. That is crazy. Well, this is like a miracle today. So we're going to take notes. So, and talk about, I know you're involved in a lot of organizations. So we're going to go back, we're going to go to your childhood and ask some questions and see how you went on your journey. So let's talk about your childhood, how you were raised and what kind of influences did you have?
Yeah, I think that's an important part of my life too.
Yeah.
I was raised in a fishing town on the east coast of England, and I went away to boarding school when I was 8 years old.
Yeah.
And my my sister and my cousins had gone before me. So it wasn't that I was going to a school where I didn't know anybody, but it was 300 miles away.
300 miles
I think that's about 450 kilometers away. So once you're there, you're there.
You cannot run away.
One thing, the school insisted that we write weekly letters home to our parents.
Oh, wow.
And that'll come out later, that was an important way of recording my life, because the important letters my parents kept. So that was really nice reference to go back to. But it was a Church of England boarding school. Orphans of clergymen had free education, and my father wasn't a clergyman, and everybody else paid for their education. But my parents considered that it was an important overall education. It wasn't strong academically, actually. They excelled in sports and in arts and music.
Which is very important. Very, very important.
Yeah, the sports was a big part of my life, right, right from the get-go. And for our holidays, like a lot of my friends and relatives, they would go to Europe for their holidays. We didn't. We always had our holidays within the United Kingdom. Some in Scotland, but mostly in England. And they were always walking holidays. So I think that really instilled in me a love of the outdoors, because we would climb. The mountains are pretty small in England, but we would still climb the mountains and enjoy the hiking and observe nature. And that was an important part of my childhood. One thing, when I was at this boarding school, I think I was only maybe 13, 14 years old, a visiting minister came from South Africa. His name was Father Trevor Huddleston, and he gave this amazing sermon. In the school, we went to chapel every morning and every evening, and every Sunday, obviously. So anyway, he came and preached the Sunday sermon this time, and he had some slides, and he was working with African mostly children, outside Johannesburg. And he was telling us all about the life of these children under apartheid, and asked us to compare our lives as privileged children in this girls' boarding school compared to the lives of these children in Africa. And that sermon stuck with me. And right from that day onwards, I think I yearned to go to South Africa and to do kind of international development work. And that's where my interest was first piqued. So first of all, my upbringing from my parents and the way they brought us up at home, and then the influence of the school certainly paid a big influence in the rest of my life.
So talk about your upbringing at home a little bit. How was it?
Well,
were your parents strict, or were the parents how was it?
Well, I would say they were just normal for strict. But because I was away at boarding school, I was only at home in the summertime and Christmas after the age of 8. Wow. Before that was primary school, and that was just a short walk away. We lived very close to my grandparents, and my mother's sister lived close by. So we were like one big family. So I was born at the end of the war. My father and my uncles were all away fighting in the war. And so both our families lived with my grandparents during wartime. And so after the war was over, we were brought up under rationing. So food was always very precious. And we were never like kids now. If they want something, they just go and get a cookie or whatever they want. That was never allowed. It wasn't because my parents were being strict. It just wasn't available. It was very difficult to get any food that wasn't essential food, because you just had your ration book and you were allowed to get so much a week, and that was it. And the same thing when I went away to school, I had to take the ration book with me too. So the school provided our meals, but they had what's called a tuck shop, where we took our own candy that you could go every Saturday if you wanted some candy and use it. But we were restricted on what we could take because of the rationing.
Let's talk about the ration, because I think a lot of people, they don't know, like, because everything is so easy now, right? Let's talk about what is rationing, right? And
well, you're only allowed so much of each item a week.
Yeah.
Like, I was born right at the end of the war, so I don't have a clear memory of it, but eggs were very precious. I don't know how many you're allowed a week, but maybe 6. There wouldn't be any more than that, I'm sure. And so much milk. You would have a ration book, and when you went to buy something, they would take that coupon away.
Yeah.
So that was the end of that kind of food for that week. And it was only because of the war that the food wasn't available.
Yeah.
And then for a long time after the war, like for several years, I forget how many, the food was still rationed. All the windows were blacked out all the time during wartime. So in our town, you would see lots of industrial buildings with the windows blocked off and bricked over kind of permanently, because so Germany couldn't find the major towns and the important things. It was all blacked out. So, I mean, that's a very distant memory for me. But it was a very important part of my older sibling and cousin's life. Yeah.
So when you were rationing, would you change some of the coupons with other people? Would you say, hey, look, I'll give you 2 candies?
No.
No, you couldn't do that, right?
No.
So,
Well, you probably could.
But you didn't.
But it was so strict. You wouldn't want to give up anything that you were allowed.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did you have some hunger days and things like that, or?
No, I don't ever remember being hungry.
Yeah.
I just remember we were allowed 2 sweets, which is the equivalent of candy, after lunch each day. Those were the only candies we were allowed.
Yeah.
I guess you could say that was strict, but it was necessary, you know.
Yeah, a survivor, right?
Yeah.
So, well, okay, so did this affect you when you get older, or were you like, did you?
Yes, when I emigrated from England to Canada, I found Canada very wasteful to begin with.
Yeah.
Like in England, we would close the door when we went out of every room, so the heat stayed in the one room that you were using, because we didn't heat the whole house.
Yeah.
And you'd turn the lights off when you left the room.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't waste any food.
Yeah.
So when I first emigrated to Canada, it was to Montreal.
Yeah.
And I was struck by what felt like waste at that time.
Yeah.
Like doors would stay open and lights would stay on and cars would run. And
Oh, you're right. That's crazy. You know, in a lot of cultures, actually, you're not supposed to waste food. Right? I mean, you get reminded every day that people are hungry. Don't waste your food, right?
Absolutely.
So, like, you know, I remember my parents, they wouldn't let us leave the table unless we finished the food and we clean it up with like a bread.
Well, that's right.
Right.
But then you mustn't let the parents put too much food on the plate to begin with.
Yeah, no, they didn't. No, just if you didn't like it, you have to eat it.
Yeah. But like in restaurants now, they pile the food up so high, and that creates waste. It's much better to have small amounts, and then if you're hungry, you'll have the next course. And if you're not, you don't.
You see, the thing is, it's more food, but it's less nutrition, right? So you're not getting the same amount of nutrition, right? In the, you know, like in the older days, everything was nutrient dense, right?
Yeah.
But now you eat the same thing, like you have to eat like 5 of them.
Yeah, we would have meat once a week, I remember. We would have a roast every Sunday. Yeah. And then on the Monday, you'd have that cold. And then maybe the next day it would be ground up. Yeah. And that was the end of your meat for that week. Yeah. But because we lived in this fishing town, my grandfather and my uncles worked on the fish docks. So we did get fresh fish twice a week, which was wonderful.
That's good.
Yeah, it was excellent.
What are some of your fond memories of your childhood?
Well, I always enjoyed school. When I was away in boarding school, I guess I was still a child, I was only 8. It didn't take long for me to become a member of the photographic club, and I started developing and printing other people's photos.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
With all the chemicals and things like that. Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. So I enjoyed doing that. The main sports I was interested in was rounders and tennis. Rounders is like softball, different but similar, the closest I can get to that. And netball we played. I wasn't that keen on netball, but tennis I loved. I was on the school tennis team, and every Sunday we went for walks. You had to go in what they called a crocodile, like hold hands with your partner, and I think you had to have at least 12 people together. But then you could go more or less wherever you wanted, but you had to go for an hour. So that was always enjoyable, the Sunday walks. Kind of funny routines we had. Saturday morning we had to do our sewing. Any mending, any rips in your clothes or holes in your socks or anything like that, you had to sew them. That was the Saturday morning. Saturday afternoon was always sports. Saturday night they might have a film or some entertainment. The week's routine of school were lessons in the morning, and half the afternoon was sports, and the other half was prep, like study. And then in the evening you would have 1 hour more classes and 1 hour more prep. So it was a very strict routine at school, for sure.
Yeah, it's almost like military style. I mean, that's what boarding school is, right?
Yeah,
so, something very interesting you mentioned. You said that you would mend your clothes and things like that. Now, as soon as people have a hole in the clothes, they throw it in the garbage, right? It's like...
Yeah, no, it wasn't like that then, for sure. And at home, too, my mother had a big sewing box, and what do they call it? Like, it looks like a mushroom that you put the sock over, and the darning needle. And no, she would always be busy darning and sewing and putting up or down hems, whatever way the trend was. I always got passed down clothes from my sister was older, and she would get them from her cousin that was older. So I was always at least third in line on the clothing.
I mean, nobody does it anymore, right?
No.
Everything is like so, but the quality has gone down again, right? So even though it's hand-down clothes, you had better material that is better for your skin, for your body, right? Now we have all these material, but they're not really material, right? So.
The one other thing about food as children, like I still have trouble providing salad in the winter because we never did. We would have whatever was in season. And we never got stuff from overseas. So, pineapple was a rare treat. Pineapple. So you'd have, your fruit would be apples and pears and cherries, what grows in England. And so I still have difficulty here. Buying things that weren't grown locally or that are out of season. I don't like doing that.
Why? Because of the...
Something has to be done artificially to allow that to happen, or it has to have travelled a long way. And so either way, it's bad for the environment, right? So.
Okay. Anything else you want to talk about your childhood? What are some of the fun memories with your father or grandparents?
Oh, my grandfather was very special. He taught me how to play cricket.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We would play ball games all the time. He loved birds, and he would show me birds' nests and things like that. He commentated the football matches to people in hospital. He did that every week. He was a football fanatic, but he was also a good commentator on, like, calling the game for people who couldn't get there. And he had a great sense of humour and played the piano. My grandmother also played the piano, but my grandfather was much more spontaneous and great sense of humour. My father, he would tell stories. He always made them up in his head, and I always enjoyed
He's a director.
His stories.
Fictional director.
And his older sister died young. I never met her, but he would tell me stories about her. She was really interested in Ernest Shackleton, the explorer, and so he would tell me about these explorer stories. I think that probably also influenced me. I always wanted to be an explorer. So,
So you went through the boarding school. Then what was after that? Let's talk about your other experiences.
Okay, I then went to physiotherapy school.
Why physiotherapy?
What is physiotherapy?
No, why?
Oh, why?
Yeah.
Because my main interest was sports and science.
Oh, okay.
And the science teacher suggested it,
Yeah.
and just seemed like a great idea. I looked into either physiotherapy, radiology, or speech therapy. My parents taught me out of doing radiology because they thought it was too dangerous. And
For the radiation?
yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Oh.
And
Is it really
anyway, I'm really thankful I did physiotherapy. If I had my life over again, I would choose it again. I really enjoy it.
Let's talk about how you started. What were some of the experiences?
So my training was all done at St Thomas's Hospital in London. Now it's all university-based, but at that time it wasn't. So half the day, every day was theory, and half the day, every day was practical. Actually treating patients. And St Thomas's is a big hospital opposite the Houses of Parliament on the Thames in London. It was a very well recognised hospital. One of the people who taught me was Dr. James Syriacs, who was renowned for manipulations. And
When you say manipulation, what do you mean by that?
spinal manipulation.
Like chiropractor almost, right? Or
Yes, it was very similar, only it wasn't chiropractic, but it was... Not many physios were doing that at that time, and we weren't allowed to say that when we had our exams because it was frowned on by the rest of the profession. But he was brilliant, and he actually arranged for the medical students and the physiotherapy students to have an annual dance together, and we taught anatomy was both groups together, the medical students and the physio students. So that really helped social life as well as the physiotherapy learning. Yeah.
Is that where you met your husband?
No, that was much later.
Okay. So you did your physiotherapy, and what happened when you graduated?
I went to work at the Royal Free Hospital, which is another big hospital in London. And while I was there, they were really well known for doing kidney transplants. Oh, wow. They did the first kidney transplants in England. I don't know about the world. And so occasionally I was called in at night to do chest physiotherapy on these patients when they were doing... If things didn't go right and they had to do CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, sometimes I was called in to help with that. So that was always a very memorable occasion.
How did you help with it?
By doing the compressions.
Okay, so can you explain, like you press a different part of the body, or?
No, usually the doctor would actually do the compressions, but I would do some of the lung compressions to clear the lung. The lungs. Yeah.
How is that? So you press on the lung? I'm going to lay on the table now.
Press and vibrate at the same time
with your hands.
Clear the secretions out of the lungs.
I never know something like this existed.
Well, it was quite rare at that time, and they don't do that anymore, I don't think.
Why?
Well, CPR is now just your cardiac compressions and your mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. But there, the physio would help with the positioning and draining the lungs as well. Because kidney transplants were so new, the only candidates that they were taking were young men. And they were young, healthy men with a kidney problem. So they tried ultra hard to resuscitate these people if things didn't go right.
Oh, okay. So the men were the guinea pig, basically. Was that?
They weren't the guinea pig.
Sounds like it. They were taking only men. It's like this.
I think at that time men were prioritized over women even more than they are now.
Why?
Just the way life is. Some countries it's still like that, right? So now in Canada, men and women are pretty well, you wouldn't do that anymore. If you needed the medical treatment, whether you were male or female, you would get it. But back then, men would be given the priority. Because they were wage earners, I think that was the basic thing. There weren't so many women in the workforce. And so men had to support their family. They would choose them. But I wouldn't call them guinea pigs. They were given a much better opportunity.
Experiment.
If they didn't have that transplant, they would die.
Yeah. So did they ever brought ladies in for this thing or no? There was only men.
Only men in the early stages.
Oh, early stages.
In the early stages, only young men. Oh yeah, women can have kidney transplants now. But in the early stages, when it was, I think they were the first hospital to do it. They were not guinea pigs.
Imagine. Congratulations.
Anyway, when I was working in that hospital, I became friends with another physiotherapist. And we were playing tennis after work one day. And I said to her, what are you going to do when you leave the Royal Free Hospital? She said, I want to go to South Africa.
Oh, so that thing came back.
Yeah.
Did you forget about it until that moment? Or was it always in the back of your mind?
It was way back in my mind.
Oh, so she brought it up.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Okay. Yes, because I said, well, that's amazing. I said, I want to go to South Africa too. And I said, why do you want to go? So her uncle was Archdeacon of Zululand, and she had always wanted to go there to see that part of the world. And her cousin, her first cousin, lived in Pietermaritzburg, close to the east coast of South Africa. My father's younger sister had married a South African. They farmed in England, but after he died, like several years later, she decided to emigrate to South Africa to go and be with his family in South Africa. So I had an aunt in Cape Town, and Penny, my friend, had the cousin and uncle in Pietermaritzburg. So anyway, after we'd finished playing tennis and decided we both really wanted to do this, she said, well, I go past the travel agents on my way home. I can stop in and make some inquiries. So I said, okay. Next morning at work, when I saw Penny, she said, I made provisional bookings for us to fly to South Africa in November. She'd already booked our flights. I couldn't believe it.
Like, I have to go now. No choice.
So yes, we never looked back. We kept the booking, and I told my parents, and they didn't put up any complaints.
Oh, wow. Usually parents will be like, no, you know how it goes in the family, right?
Yeah, they had some, my mother said, please don't marry over there. That was her main concern. But to go and come back. So we went on year return ticket. So when we went, we had promise of living with Penny's cousin in Pietermaritzburg to start with. And we had our return flight. We didn't have a job. We never applied, but we figured that physiotherapy was a needed profession. We shouldn't have any difficulty finding work. So I actually only had £10 in my pocket, which is equivalent of $30 at that time, when I flew to South Africa. So $30, promise of accommodation, and a return ticket. So we took our chances, but took us a couple of weeks to find work, and then we found work, and then we worked at the Addington Hospital, big hospital in Durban, right on the east coast, on the Indian Ocean.
So when you went there, what was your first experience? Like, hey, was there anything really different from your country? What were some of the things that you noticed right away when you went there?
Well, the first thing stepping off the plane was the heat and some humidity. Like, you just felt it could only be Africa. And just on the drive from... we arrived in Lourenço Marques in Mozambique first, and just the drive from the airport to the hotel we were going to spend that first night was from a shanty town to the city. And the shanty town was just tarpaulin shacks, and the city was beautiful Portuguese architecture. So that was the first shock, the discrepancy like that. But in South Africa, and particularly when we went to work in Addington, apartheid was just so obvious and everywhere. The Addington was a white hospital. Every person who worked there was white. Every patient was white. And that was the first time I'd ever come across that kind of racial segregation.
Let's talk about apartheid, because I know a lot of people don't even know what it is. So let's talk about what it is mean.
Well, it was a South African policy. It was actually introduced in 1948 in South Africa, and stayed in place till, I think it was 1998, when Nelson Mandela became Prime Minister anyway. For all that length of time, apartheid was the law, which was segregation of the races. So it wasn't just whites and blacks. Indian, Chinese, Japanese, Cape Coloreds, they were all segregated in different levels in this color segregation.
You want to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, you'd go to the beach and there would be benches, and it would say knee blankies verboten. That meant non-whites forbidden. So, you know, the beaches were separate, the benches were separate. Yeah. Government buildings like the post office, separate doors. Transportation, usually separate buses, but if not, separate part of the bus. To have social mixing between the races was forbidden. Like marriage was strictly forbidden. Yeah, it was very, very strict and very strict laws about it, and many black Africans were jailed during that time. Yeah. The black Africans had to have passes, and if they went out of the area where they were meant to be, they could go to jail. Yeah. It was a terrible, terrible situation.
So was it the same rule for everybody, like Asian, Japanese, and all that?
No, it wasn't the same, and I don't know if I can fully remember the differences. No. The main segregation was between blacks and whites, and I think it was the Chinese that were included as honorary whites, and the Indians as Asians, and actually Gandhi made a point of traveling on a train, and he sat in the white compartment, and he was thrown off the train. Because he was non-white, although he wasn't black. He was non-white, and he was thrown off the train in Pietermaritzburg.
That's when he was a lawyer, right?
Yeah, correct.
And then when he got kicked out, he's like, you know what, this word doesn't mean anything. I'm going to go and just...
Yeah, that's what really got him going, I think, on his work in...
You're walking up, it's like, oh, good day.
They actually now have a monument to him in Pietermaritzburg for him making the point of...
Do you want to tell the story about the Gandhi, the train, you know, the full story, like when he was sitting and what happened, you know, just...
Well, I'm not sure if I know the whole story, but, you know, he was obviously Indian, and so the South African police came and said, why are you on this train? This is whites only. And said, well, I've paid for my ticket just the same as anybody else. I got every right to travel. And they said, no, you get off at the next stop, and so they made him get off, and so he went public about that, and got lots of support from the Indian community and the rest of the world, and all incidents like that, you know, went to have other people, like in England, Canada, and other countries, understand what was going on in South Africa, and gradually, but it took so long. Did apartheid pull apart, but it was a long time after Gandhi was thrown off the train. He was thrown off the train before he did all his work in India.
Oh, that's crazy. He was a lawyer, right?
Yes, he was a lawyer.
That's when you realize it doesn't mean anything who you are. It's just the color of your skin.
I know.
You know? That's crazy. How we treat each other.
Being Gandhi and Mandela are two of my big heroes.
Big heroes.
Yeah, for sure.
So then, because I know you're part of a lot of humanitarian projects and things like that, right? So talk about what you saw there that maybe changed you to pursue these kind of things.
Well, like I spent a year in South Africa, and Penny, my friend, had a Mini, like a Austin Mini, a little dilapidated car, and we just worked long enough in each community to earn enough money to move on to the next one. So we started off in Durban.
Like gypsies, right? Almost like...
Well, except gypsies in a car, I don't think.
Well, you traveled all over, right?
Yeah. So anyway, our next major port of call after Durban was Cape Town. So to get from Durban to Cape Town, you travel the garden route. It takes about a week. And by the time we got towards Cape Town, we'd had to spend a lot of money on repairs on the car. Things were going wrong with it. And I phoned my aunt in Cape Town to say we were on our way. She lived with an old lady in Cape Town whose name was Daisy Solomon. She was famous in her own right. Her father had been governor of the Cape. Daisy Solomon had been a suffragette in England, her and her mother, fighting for women's vote in England. And she chained herself to the lamppost at one point. Anyway, she was jailed in England many times for her work as a suffragette.
Because fighting for women's rights?
Yeah, fighting for women's rights.
They put you in jail for fighting for women's rights?
Oh, totally.
What the heck is
this? This was before women had the vote. I mean, this, yeah. Oh. And actually, one time, she tried to get an audience with the Prime Minister, and he refused to see her. So her and another suffragette, they put the Prime Minister's address on their coats and a stamp, and they got the post office to deliver them to the Prime Minister's office in London, and then he had to see them, and it worked.
That's amazing.
So that was brilliant. But after that, she tried to get other interviews with the Prime Minister and was refused, and so then she went to Holloway Prison several times. But anyway, by the time I got there, that was all in the past. England, women got the vote and all of that. So anyway, but we did stay with my aunt, my father's sister, and Daisy Solomon. It was Daisy Solomon's house that my aunt lived in. So when I phoned to say that we were coming, my aunt said, "Oh, can you wait another week? We have another guest here." And we couldn't wait another week. We had no money. We just had enough gas to get to Cape Town. We didn't know how we could camp in the city. So we drove there anyway and parked outside their house and walked up the driveway and knocked on their door. And this African servant came up and greeted us very nicely and said, "Oh, come on in," and took us into the dining room. And there were Daisy Solomon and my aunt and another elderly lady sitting there with shawls around their shoulders in long evening dress, eating fruit with a knife and fork, with finger bowls in front of them. So my aunt looked really embarrassed. We were just in cut-off shorts and thong sandals, and we'd been camping for a week. Anyway, Daisy Solomon greeted us very graciously, and she said, "Oh, that's fine." She said, "Come on in. And you can stay in the study and we'll give you some food." And so I apologized. I said, "I'm sorry, we just didn't have anywhere else to go." "Oh, that'll be lovely having you." So Daisy Solomon was totally fine about it. But because my aunt was kind of a guest in her house, she felt embarrassed that we had gate crashed. But anyway, we stayed there a month and it worked out fine. So anyway, I worked at Fortescue Hospital in Cape Town, which is where the first heart transplant operation was done by Christian Barnard. So that was exciting to be there. We worked there for 4 months. We stayed at my aunt's place for about a month, and then we moved to another cottage right on above the Atlantic, actually. You could walk down the rocks and have your own little private swimming place. So that was really nice. That was called Backoven. And then after that, when we left Cape Town, we went to Namibia, which is at that time was called Southwest Africa. It was its own country. And did some hiking there, and then we moved on to Johannesburg. And in Johannesburg, I worked at Baragwanath, which is a 2,000-bed African hospital for Soweto. So that was so different from working at the Addington and Groote because Baragwanath was only for Africans. And they hadn't trained any black physiotherapists yet. So they took white physiotherapists.
How was it different? How was the medical treatment? Was it equal as the other hospitals, or was it different?
Well, it was crowded. I heard some bad stories, like for abortions and that, I was told was really horrible at Baragwanath. But I wasn't involved in that side of things. I worked at the cerebral palsy clinic, so for young kids, and it was wonderful. It was very well run by African sisters. But once a week, the white pediatrician would come to see the children and, advise on therapy and that. And on that one afternoon a week, all our roles changed because all the rest of the time, the black African sisters were our bosses and we would work under them. And then when he came, he treated us as equals and the African sisters as below him. So, but for that afternoon, once a week, the roles changed and then everything reverted back the way it should be.
When you saw that? Was it awkward when you saw that? Like,
well, it wasn't so much awkward. It just felt so horrible about it because, you know, you were white, so you were part of that system. And yet the African sister in charge of this cerebral palsy clinic, she was fluent in 7 languages, but she wasn't allowed a passport because she was black. She actually took us around Soweto one day, and that was so interesting, and enjoyed that. No, I loved that job until much later in life I went to India, but up until then, my work at Baragwanath was my favourite job for many, many years. It was awesome. I remember us taking the kids to the zoo one day, and one of the African sisters had a jerry can, you know, like a potty, on her head with toilet paper on her head, walking around the zoo like that, as if that was normal. It just looked so comical to me, but yeah, it was fun. So after Johannesburg, well, actually during Johannesburg, we went to the Kruger Park on a safari, and also went on a private farm safari, so saw lots of wildlife. Had difficulty with our car again, but anyway.
Did any animals chase you?
They couldn't chase us because we couldn't walk. We had to be in a vehicle. But we did have problems. When we were in the Kruger, you were told not to get out of your car. And we did overheat, and somebody had to come and help us and fix the water line. But then another time, we got the whole herd of elephants was crossing the road just in front of us with calves, and we counted about 40 of them. We thought, oh, this is too close, we better back up. Went to back up, and the rest of the herd was crossing behind us. And we were just in this little Mini with the door tied onto the steering column with string. We weren't in a safe little car. So anyway, we had to stay put until the whole herd crossed, and we thought if one of them sat on us, that would squish us, but they didn't take much notice of us. They just looked at us as they went by. So no, we never got chased by an animal. No.
Good.
And yeah, after the safaris, we also, on the way to the safari, filling up with gas, we had GB, Great Britain, plates on the back of our car, and another fellow who was also filling up with gas came over and talked to us. And anyway, it turned out he was head of the mountain club in Johannesburg. And so he said, when you get back to Johannesburg, you know, you should come hiking with us. So we exchanged phone numbers, and that's what we did. So I did a lot of hiking in the Mahalisburg Mountains, just outside Johannesburg. So that's really where my love of hiking and mountaineering developed there also.
Is that where you met your husband?
No, that was much later.
Okay, so let's move forward and then...
Okay, so... We've pretty well done all of South Africa, except we did go to Lesotho, Basotho land, a little African country surrounded by South Africa. Spent some time there. And during our travels, well, actually, when we were in Johannesburg, we went to a lecture at Witwatersrand University, the big university, and given by an archaeologist whose name was Harold Pager, and he was studying Bushman art. And the lecture was on this, and at the end of the lecture, he said, would anybody like to come and spend a week in the cave with me where I'm studying this Bushman art? Penny and I shot our hands up.
You were very adventurous.
And,
You're still...
and we went and spent a week in his cave in the Drakensberg. And so that was awesome. We stayed in a Bushman cave and then walked from cave to cave looking at the Bushman art. And he spent 2 years in this cave and then wrote a book about the Bushman art of the Drakensberg. And so... yeah, we met such interesting people and had these amazing experiences.
You have so much stories, you know, like it's crazy. Like we could be here for 10 days. You know,
yeah, well, I know. And Penny's uncle, who was Archdeacon of Zululand, he took us around Zululand and we met Bishop Zulu. So, you know, the average tourist wouldn't get those experiences. Yeah.
So talk about No, you say Bushman, right? And then
Yeah.
some of these...
Their proper name is San, S-A-N.
Yeah.
And I was told by an African Zimbabwean that San is a much more respectful term.
San.
Yeah. But we always call them Bushmen. In my book, I've called them Bushmen.
Yeah.
And I looked it up, and some Bushmen don't mind being called Bushmen,
Yeah.
but apparently San is a more correct term.
So what you saw, what are some of the experiences with that? Like what was the difference? Like what's some of the
They're a much shorter stature.
Okay.
And they hunt with bow and arrow.
Yeah.
They were largely pushed out. Their main area was the Kalahari Desert, but they were largely pushed out by both Zulu and white people. And there's very few Bushmen left anymore, sadly.
So let's move forward. And then I just want to get your story, and then we can talk about your books and stuff like that. Because I want to know how you got to the books, right?
Okay, well, after my year in South Africa, so I went back the last day that my year's return ticket was valid. I had to borrow £10 on excess baggage to leave the country. So I had £10 when I arrived and had to borrow 10 to leave. But anyway, after that year, I really wanted to write about my experience. I had written weekly letters home to my parents, just like I did at school, and with all the details of what we were doing. And they kept those letters, which was awesome. And I wanted to write about it. I was thinking of writing an article for Reader's Digest. But anyway, I kept putting it off, and I never got around to it. But it stayed in my head as an important part of my life. And it actually influenced my life in many ways. So eventually I wrote the book, Mini Saga in South Africa, but that's my most recently published book, and it's all about those experiences. But because of the experiences I had there, I went to work in pediatrics with children as a physiotherapist because of my experiences at Baragwanath. I went on to do international development work because of my interest at Baragwanath there.
Let's talk about humanity. What was that? I said again?
International development, I said, but humanitarian is probably a better term.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, so when I was looking to do more overseas development work like I'd done in South Africa. And so I looked for opportunities in Africa, but they all wanted a minimum of 1 year commitment. They really wanted 2-year commitments. I was married at that time, and I didn't want to leave home for that long. So India was advertising also, and it was only a 6-month commitment. So that was the only reason I applied to work for Action Health in India, volunteer with them, instead of Africa. I'd really had no previous desire to go to India. But anyway, so I took a year's leave of absence from my work at the Prince George Regional Hospital, and went to India to this organization called Samuha. And I went there as a physiotherapy trainer, training local village people how to work with physiotherapy, mostly at the height of their polio epidemic. So it was all kids, and it was nearly all children with polio. So I helped develop the disability program there. I went for 6 months, but wound up staying just over a year anyway. I loved the work so much. I came back for Christmas for a month to renew my life with my family, and then went back for another 6 months. But after completing that year, and when I first started, there were 5 disability workers. By the time I finished, there were 12 disability workers. And we were also moving to another geographical area as well. So I helped develop that. And then the year after I got back to Canada from India, I started up a charity in Prince George called Samoa Overseas Development Association, called SODA for short.
SODA.
And when we first started fundraising, I think the first year we managed to send $4,000 to India to help them, and then it became 7, and then it became 10. Now we send a minimum of $20,000 every year to the program in India. And I went back every year to India to help develop the program and to train more people. And I did that for 25 years. I went for a month at a time using my holiday time from the hospital in Prince George.
Let's talk about the program, what you developed there. What does it exactly do?
Well, it started off only being children, and most of that was children with polio.
Yeah.
So we would, people would bring their families, bring their children to the centre, and they would get assessed. So with polio, it was mostly affecting people's legs. It could affect the whole body, could affect just one arm, but mostly it was legs. And because there'd been no physio or no other medical treatment available to these people in this rural backward part of India, these kids had been crawling on their hands and knees for several years.
Yep.
So they'd developed terrible deformities in their ankles, knees and hips.
Yep.
So we assessed which children could be helped by stretching exercises, followed by plaster casting to stretch their legs out, and which ones needed to be referred to Bangalore, which is a city like Vancouver, for surgery. And then after the deformities were corrected, then we made braces for the legs. So the braces they made out of PVC pipe, and which was a readily available commodity, and same with crutches, or sometimes they made the crutches just out of wood. And then you would help the child to stand up for the first time with these braces on and this big smile across their face. Sometimes they were 7 years old already, or even older, standing up for the first time and then being able to walk with crutches rather than just crawling on their belly on the ground, you know. So it made such a huge, huge difference to their life. And then we also, Samua was involved in encouraging families to take their children for vaccination. The polio vaccine has to be kept colder than 40 degrees Celsius for it to work. Well, in India, the temperature often went higher to that. There was no refrigeration, no electricity in any of these villages. So to begin with, these children would get vaccinated but would still get polio because the vaccine had got too warm and it didn't work. So then nobody would bring their children anymore. So it was a huge campaign, first of all, to keep the vaccine cold, and then to educate the families that it did work. And the only way to eradicate polio was to get vaccinated. And so we would round up the children, round up the nurses with their cold boxes, and go out to the village itself so we could see the children and give them the vaccine. And gradually, over years, polio did get eliminated. It got eliminated in the villages where Samua was working first because we were so diligent in doing that. But it's now been eradicated in India, I would say, for about 10 years already. So that was a huge thing. So now we see anybody with any disability. And there's now, so we went from 5 to 12 disability workers. Now there's 27 disability workers. And they don't only work with people with physical disability, they work with the visually impaired and the deaf as well. But SODA, we only fund the people with physical disability. So we've just actually funded an autism clinic. That was our main thing last year to fund. And I take Canadian students over there also, Canadian physio and occupational therapy students, so they can get that experience as well. And then they also might go and do overseas development work.
You're like a ball of light. You're like the sunshine. You make, you know, you spend most of your life making a difference, right?
I love doing that.
Why? Because not a lot of people do that, you know. It's our duty to do that. But
I was really scared going to India. I previously had no desire to go there. I thought I would get mugged. I just felt really anxious about it. As soon as I got inside the gates of Samua and saw all these smiling faces, I just felt fine from that moment onwards. Now, it was minus 47, sorry, plus 47 when I first got to India, and it stayed that temperature my first 5 days.
Oh, wow.
And there was no power, no electricity, so no fans. And I didn't trust the water yet. So those first few days were really difficult. I got really dehydrated and that. But anyway, they did all their work early in the morning and late in the evening. so that you would avoid the heat of the day.
Yeah.
And we mostly went to people's villages and always work under the shade of a tree and that. It was just awesome. Like, the people were so appreciative of the work.
Yeah.
The staff I worked with, they didn't mind how many hours they worked. They were so keen to learn. It was amazing. And so, yeah, that's why I got to love the work and to go back and see things improving. They're still improving, and the program's going really, really well. I haven't been back there since COVID because COVID affected people really badly in India. And when I go back, I want to be able to take Canadian students again.
Yeah.
So possibly next fall I might go.
Did any of your kids follow your footsteps?
No. No, I think my husband and my kids, I think they would all hate it, actually. I wanted my husband... Later on, I went to Bhutan, and I thought my husband would like that. But no, he had no interest in going. The kids... Like, it's very difficult being a white person there. When I went, I was already 50. Very difficult for a white child to give up everything they're used to here and to get used to the diet. And I love Indian food, but it's not an easy thing to do. I have taken other people, you know, younger than me, but not teenagers. And some of them have really liked it, and some not so much. Most of them have really liked it.
Since we talk about the husband here, how did you how did you meet your husband?
My husband is Canadian. Okay. He was raised in Saskatchewan on a farm, and he's as Canadian as you can get. And he worked for West Coast Energy, a gas pipeline company, and a transmission company. And lived in Summit Lake, and that's not how I met him. We met him at the rodeo in Prince George.
Yeah, rodeo?
Yes.
Was it the dance kind of a thing? Or
yes, it was.
It was a dance? Oh, I just guessed that. What kind of dance was it? Square dancing?
No, just regular dancing.
Okay,
the rodeo dance,
rodeo dance. What happened? So he saw you, his eyes came out of his brain, and he ran?
We saw each other at the rodeo, and then we went to the dance and saw each other again, and
That's it. Was he like, he looked at you, he's like, boom, 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 you know, the eye like
I
a wolf.
so.
Boom, boom, boom. Like, oh. So you danced a couple of times, and then what happened? You got married after that, or?
We got married about 2 years after.
2 years after, okay.
Yeah. But yes, he was already living in Summit Lake. I was living in Prince George. And we gradually got to know each other better. He's been back to England with me 3 times now, I think.
3 times?
We went to South Africa together on one trip, and so South Africa and England, but he doesn't really like travelling. He stopped flying altogether now because of the environmental influence of flights. I still fly, but less than I would if it wasn't for the environmental damage.
Was it love at the first dance?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, let's talk about your books. Let's grab all your books here, and then let's talk about them. Love at the first dance. You know, it's like.
So, which one do you want to?
Let's go one by one and talk about each of them.
Start at the beginning.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. So, Footsteps to Freedom is the book I wrote about my time in India. So, like I say, I spent a year there in 94 to 95, and then I went back every year for 25 years, and this book is following about that. So the first, that's me. The first part of the book is about that year and what we did and how Samuha developed and the different children that we worked with and the different people that I trained. And the middle part of the book is Developing Soda, our charity in Prince George. Those are all the braces that are made locally. Yep. And artificial legs. They make artificial limbs there too.
That is amazing. Good.
I never taught that part of it. They went for local training in Bangalore for the orthotic part of it. And then the last part of the book is seeing where those children are now, 25 years later. So they started off being 1.5, 2 years old, some of them. And then by the end, they were 20 to 25 years old. So seeing what a difference the physio program had made in their lives and how they were now able to work and fend for themselves. That's the spinal cord injury unit, which was enabled by the fundraising from Prince George, from SODA fundraising. So once polio was eliminated in India, we went on to include adults. And we were seeing people with spinal cord injury, and then I would find that when I saw them 2 years later, they would have died. And it turned out they were dying of either urinary tract infections or from pressure sores that had gone bad on them. Yeah. So for somebody with a spinal cord injury in Canada, you would have special treatment, you would have a special wheelchair with special cushion, you would sleep on a waterbed or a bed that decreased the amount of pressure on your skin. And somebody would facilitate you moving every 2 hours so you wouldn't get continued pressure on one part of your body. The people with spinal cord injury who never had any physiotherapy or any follow-up, as soon as they were discharged from hospital, they were just sent home. They would go back to sleeping on the floor. They couldn't feel any pain because they had no sensation, and they would develop these horrendous pressure sores, and then they would die from it. So anyway, once I realized what was happening, we decided that we really needed to build a spinal cord injury unit where people could come for 1 to 3 months to get the training they needed and get the equipment they needed before going home to back to their rural lifestyle. So we fundraised for that in Prince George, and it's been up and running now for several years.
How can people get involved if they want to donate to you, or where do they go?
SODA is the name of our charity, and samuha.ca is our website. Samuha is spelled S-A-M-U-H-A. So samuha.ca, and it tells you how you can donate. We have a fundraising dinner every year in Prince George at the end of October.
Is there dancing involved?
Sorry?
Is there dancing involved?
And that's really the only fundraising we do. Yeah. And we put an article in the Citizen newspaper. We try and spread it out through social media, and we have an email list. But otherwise, if people are interested, go to samuha.ca, and all the information is there.
Okay, let's move to your next book.
So I missed talking about that when you were talking to me earlier. But the next place I went to, the medical officer of health for the Nishka out of Terrace, used to take medical teams to Tibet every year. And I knew him, and I said, well, do you ever take physiotherapists? No, we never have. Well, I said, don't you think you should? Well, maybe we could, and why don't you apply? So I wrote and applied, and I was accepted. So I think it was in 1999, I went to Tibet with this medical team, and we were shown around Tibet with Rinpoche, Akong Rinpoche. He had to escape from Tibet during the Cultural Revolution and went to live in Scotland, but he was allowed back to Tibet by China 1 month a year. So he hosted us and guided us in Tibet to see the schools for orphan children that he sponsored, and some Tibetan medicine schools that he was also sponsoring. So I had the most amazing month in Tibet with this medical team, and that was awesome. And then a little bit later, I went to Bhutan. I'd heard wonderful things about the Himalayan kingdom of Bhutan, and I belonged to the Global Health Division of the Canadian Physiotherapy Association, and they were advertising that Bhutan needed a physio to, that's a Tibetan child.
It's a Tibetan child.
Yeah. That Bhutan needed a physio to teach for 4 months in their training program. They had a 2-year training program, and every 4 months they would change the physio coming in to teach. So again, it was a volunteer position, but they provided a house while I was there. So I went to Bhutan, Himalayan kingdom, whose whole constitution is built on gross national happiness, which I thought was awesome. Instead of gross national product, like Canada and most of the Western world has, Bhutan is gross national happiness.
What does that mean?
They're not looking at improving the wealth of people. If that happens, that's great. But they want everybody to be happy. So they have 4...
Everybody's smiling in these pictures. Everybody's smiling in these pictures.
That's still Tibet.
Is that? I have to move forward. But everybody's smiling in the pictures.
They have 4 pillars of gross national happiness. I'm not sure if I can remember them, but one of them is forestry. Yeah. Is to never let the country be less than 72% forested. One of them is education, to make sure that education is available for everybody in local language and in English. And yes, thanks for showing that one. That reminds me to maintain their local customs, including the local dress that the 2 young children you just showed. That was a Tibetan monastery. Actually, that's with Morrow, the Canadian climber I met there, Pat Morrow. I met him when I was in Bhutan. Oh, that is wonderful. Tiger's Nest. That's a temple high up on the cliffs. We went up there. Actually, that was on my birthday. I was blessed on my birthday at Tiger's Nest. That was awesome. Yeah, that's the Watchtower, another temple. So we did, apart from working and teaching physiotherapy there, also did a bunch of hiking. It's the most, Druk Path. We actually got lost on the Druk Path and didn't manage to complete our whole hike, and it was raining. But it was amazing. We did a 4-day hike, and Ladakh was the last place we went to in this book, and that's still in the Himalaya, but it's in the far north of India. And I went with a medical team from Vancouver, organised by an occupational therapist in Vancouver, and she needed a physiotherapist. They were opening up a paediatric clinic there. So I went to teach the local physios paediatrics, and that was all amazing also.
You've done so much. So what is this book?
This is my latest book. I finally got to write about my experiences in South Africa, and it's entitled Mini Saga in South Africa. The Mini is the car we travelled around in. So this is the little Mini.
And then you got a giraffe.
Yeah.
Were you getting chased by the giraffe?
No, we weren't getting chased. I love this cover, but it's not a photograph.
It's nice colours.
Yes, I love it. And it's actually reviewed by Dr. Simon Earle, who's a paediatrician, a South African paediatrician living in Prince George. It often takes an outsider to see a society as it really is. This is an intriguing story of 2 young women travelling with open eyes and hearts, discovering truths hidden from the local white inhabitants. So that was the review he wrote for me on the front cover of the book. So all the experiences we were talking about in South Africa are all written about in this book. It includes the influence of the church on apartheid and some of the exciting adventures we got into because of the difficulties with the Mini. And
is that the Mini?
Yeah, that's the Mini on top of one of the passes.
That's the Mini.
In the Drakensberg. Yeah, like I say, we had to tie the door onto the steering column with string. It fell right off one day. There was a lot of things wrong with that Mini. It overheated many times. The fan belt broke a few times. But it was a most amazing year. And yeah, I just released it in October. So it's a new book, really.
Where can people find your book?
It's at Books and Company in Prince George, It's on Amazon.
Oh, wow.
You can get a hardcover or the paperback or ebook.
Yeah.
It's on Kobo as an ebook. And Friesen Press has it. I published this book through Friesen Press. And so I have a website for this book, Hilary Crowley author.ca. So you can find out about all my books actually on my website, Hilary Crowley author.ca, and it'll give you the links of how to buy the book. You can't actually buy the book on my website, but the links are on the website of how to buy the book.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to close it. Do you have anything to say in closing? Any advice, anything that you want to tell the new generation who's getting into the same field that you do? Do you have anything you want to share about that?
Yes, if you're getting into physiotherapy, think of taking it overseas. There are many countries that don't have access to physiotherapy that need it. There's 1 or 2 countries that still have polio. Physio is the most important aspect of treating people with polio. During your training, you can probably do one of your placements overseas, and that's once you're a senior student, and that's a great introduction to overseas development work. The Global Health Division of the Canadian Physiotherapy Association also has lots of good information.
Throughout the whole interview, it seems that this is your passion. This has been a passion of yours, right?
Yes.
You look very happy. You look very young. Why is it so important to follow your passion and follow your dream? And then in your case, make a difference, right?
Well, that's how you make the most of your life. Like, I didn't realize it at the time, but my upbringing at home and then my year in South Africa really made the basis for the rest of my life. My father always said to me, even when I was going to school, he said, take every opportunity that comes your way. And that stuck with me, and I've always done it. We were allowed to apply to go to Wimbledon when I was at school, and I asked my father if that would be okay if I could apply. He said, go. He said, take every opportunity that comes your way. And that really stuck with me. So that got me to India, and it got me to South Africa, and it got me to Tibet, Bhutan.
That's beautiful. Anyway, it was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you so much.
And I wish you the best, and hopefully people will find out more about your organization and, you know, support it and then make a difference.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Northern BC Narrative on Location. Every guest that we have here, they have done something amazing in their life. And I hope that you get inspired to do something amazing with your life. Because life is too short and the next second is not guaranteed. So live your life like today's your last day. Until our next episode, see you later. Where did you meet your husband?